They say old age settles in when the house gets too quiet. Saturday mornings have a certain rhythm these days. I wake up early, not because I have anywhere to be, but out of habit. The kitchen feels even emptier since Susan passed away 3 years ago. Still, I set the paper down across from me, like I'm expecting her to walk in any minute and comment on the weather. That morning, I was halfway through my coffee, cooling in a chipped blue mug, when the phone rang. Not many people call at 10:30 on a Saturday. My grandkids prefer texting. My friends are either asleep or wise enough to avoid weekend interruptions. That left only one possibility: family. Sure enough, the name on the screen was my son-in-law. Brian never calls me directly unless something is wrong, or unless my daughter, Mary, insists. "Morning, George." His voice sounded as formal as always, polite but chilly. "Everything okay, Brian?" I asked, bracing myself for some kind of news. He took a breath, clearly rehearsing his lines. "Mary wants you to join us tonight. It's my mother's birthday. We're having dinner at Lakewood Country Club. 7 sharp. Dress code's business casual. Don't be late. My mother appreciates punctuality." It wasn't an invitation. It was an obligation wrapped in velvet. I mumbled my agreement. The call ended as abruptly as it started. I stood there for a moment, listening to the dial tone, remembering all the times Susan would smooth over these awkward moments. Now it was just me and my faded reflection in the window. Lakewood Country Club, where the parking lot is full of foreign cars and the cheapest glass of wine costs more than my monthly cable bill. I looked at my closet, searching for something that might pass for business casual. The navy blue shirt Susan always ironed for me would have to do. A little frayed at the cuffs, but still better than nothing. I checked my wallet, enough cash for a modest gift, certainly nothing that would impress the likes of Janet Lawson, my son-in-law's mother. But that's not why I'd go. I'd go for Mary, because she'd asked me. That's what fathers do. I drove to the mall, feeling like an imposter as I passed by the perfume counters and the designer bags. The saleswoman, a sharp-eyed lady with a genuine smile, pointed me toward a silver picture frame. Not flashy, not cheap. Safe. I let her wrap it up with a bow, paid in wrinkled bills, and left, wondering if anything I did would ever be good enough for that family. Back in my old Toyota, I watched the clock. The afternoon stretched out in front of me like a long road I had no choice but to drive. It wasn't about fitting in with the Lawsons, or impressing anyone at that country club. It was about showing up for Mary. That was enough. The drive home from the mall took longer than usual. Maybe it was the Saturday traffic, or maybe it was just the heaviness in my chest. I parked the Toyota back in its usual spot, the paint faded from years of sun and snow, and glanced at my watch. Still plenty of time until I needed to leave for the dinner, but suddenly, I wasn't in a hurry. I put the gift bag on the counter and went to my room to get changed. The navy shirt still held a faint trace of Susan's old lavender detergent. I brushed my hair, tried to smooth out the stubborn wrinkles on my pants, and gave myself a last look in the mirror. Not bad for an old man, I thought, but I doubted anyone at the Lakewood Club would notice. With the shirt tucked in and shoes polished as best as I could, I felt ready, or at least as ready as a guy like me could feel. I grabbed my keys and headed out. About an hour into the drive to Lakewood, the Ohio sun was sinking low, turning the highway gold. My mind was racing, thinking of all the ways the evening could go wrong, when a flash of silver on the shoulder caught my eye. It was a Mercedes, hazard lights blinking. Standing next to it was a woman about my age, well-dressed and looking lost, peering under the hood. I couldn't help myself. 40 years working as a mechanic, and old habits die hard. I pulled over, careful to keep a respectful distance as I stepped out. "Car trouble?" I called out, hands raised to show I wasn't a threat. She turned, relief and worry mixing on her face. "Yes, the engine just died." I have no idea what happened. My name's George. Used to be a mechanic. Mind if I take a look? After a brief hesitation, she nodded. I'm Linda. Linda Whitman. I'd appreciate any help. Her handshake was steady, her eyes sharp. Probably someone used to making decisions, I thought, but right now she was just another driver stuck on the highway. Under the hood, I saw the problem almost immediately. The serpentine belt had snapped and coolant had sprayed everywhere. I rummaged through my trunk for my old toolkit. Never leave home without it, Susan always used to say. Linda watched me work, her expensive watch glinting in the sunlight. I can probably rig something to get you to the next town, I said, wiping my hands on a rag. But you'll need a real repair soon. She smiled gratefully. You're saving my evening, George. I was on my way to a family dinner too. Funny how life throws us curves. I worked for over an hour, hands getting dirtier by the minute. By the time the engine coughed back to life, I was sweating through my shirt, my hair a mess, grease under my fingernails. Linda insisted on paying me, but I refused. Just glad to help, I told her. She pressed her card into my hand anyway. In case you ever need a favor, she said with a wink. We shook hands, and as she drove off, I realized I was now running late for the birthday dinner, and looked the part. My shirt was streaked with oil, and I didn't have time to go home and change. Still, I figured, some things matter more than appearances. I got back in my Toyota, started the engine, and headed toward the country club, not knowing just how much that roadside kindness was about to change the course of my night. By the time I pulled into the Lakewood Country Club parking lot, the sun had dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows over the rows of shiny cars. I parked my battered Toyota between a brand new Lexus and a black BMW. Even my car looked embarrassed to be there. As I stepped out, I caught my reflection in a car window. My navy shirt was streaked with oil, my pants wrinkled, and there was a stubborn smudge of grease near my temple I'd missed. The gift bag with the silver frame looked more out of place than ever. For a moment, I thought about turning around and driving home. But then I remembered Mary's voice, bright with hope on the phone. Please, Dad. It means a lot to me. So I took a deep breath, straightened my back, and walked up the stone path to the grand entrance, gift bag swinging at my side. The foyer was already humming with conversation and laughter, the sound of expensive shoes on marble floors. The door was answered by none other than Janet Lawson herself. For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes traveling from my hair to my shoes, taking in every stain and wrinkle. George, she finally managed. It sounded more like a diagnosis than a greeting. Happy birthday, Janet, I said, offering her the gift. She took it with 2 fingers, like it might bite her. Brian appeared next, his tie perfectly knotted, every hair in place. He gave me that familiar tight-lipped smile. We were beginning to wonder if you'd make it, he said, eyes flicking to my clothes. There was some car trouble on the highway, I said quietly. Had to help someone out. Mary appeared from the living room, relief flooding her face when she saw me. She hugged me tight, not caring about the dirt. I was so worried, she whispered. Behind her, the other guests had started to take notice. Conversations died down as they watched the old guy in the stained shirt and scuffed shoes walk into their perfect party. I could feel their eyes, but I kept my chin up. I'd come here for Mary, not for them. Janet led the way to the dining room, her heels clicking on the marble. I tried to melt into the background, but there was no hiding. As we entered, I heard a guest whisper, "Who is that?" Another replied, "Mary's father, I think. The one who used to fix cars." The dining room was a museum piece, chandeliers, crystal glasses, a long table set with silverware I'd need a manual to use. My place was at the far end, well away from the center of attention. Before I could sit, Janet cleared her throat. "I'm afraid, George, there's a dress code at the club." Perhaps you'd be more comfortable elsewhere? A silence fell over the room. Mary's cheeks flushed red. Mom, please. Dad came all this way. Brian just looked away, pretending to check his phone. My heart hammered, but I managed to keep my voice steady. I'm fine right here, I said. If you don't mind? But they did mind. I could see it in their eyes. For the rest of the meal, I sat in silence, picking at the food, feeling like a stranger at my own daughter's table. The only kindness came from Mary, who squeezed my hand under the table, her eyes shining with unshed tears. As the main course ended and birthday cake arrived, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I was starting to wonder if coming had been a mistake, when the doorbell rang, setting off a chain of events none of us could have predicted. The ringing of the doorbell sliced through the heavy silence. Every head turned. Janet looked annoyed. Clearly, she wasn't expecting anyone else. Brian stood, adjusting his tie, preparing his most gracious host face. I just wished I could disappear into the floor. The butler appeared, a stiff man in a crisp uniform, and quietly announced, "There's a Mrs. Whitman at the door, ma'am. She says she's here to see Mr. Campbell." At first, the name meant nothing to most of the guests. But it stopped me cold. Linda. The woman from the highway. Janet gave the butler a confused look. Who? Before anyone could answer, Linda strode confidently into the room, every bit as composed as she'd been on the side of the interstate, but now in a spotless blazer and pearls, her hair perfectly styled. Her eyes swept the room, landing on me with a warm, genuine smile. "George! What a relief to see you here!" she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. For a moment, there was nothing in the room but her voice and my own pounding heartbeat. Janet's expression twisted from confusion to something like horror. Brian's jaw dropped. And the other guests? Suddenly, I was no longer invisible. Now they all wanted to know why the most elegant woman in the room knew the odd man at the end of the table. Linda walked straight over, took my hand warmly, and turned to face the stunned crowd. "I have to thank George in front of everyone," she announced. "He saved me tonight, fixed my car when I was stranded on the highway. Refused to accept a dime for his trouble. If not for him, I never would have made it here at all." The room seemed to hold its breath. Janet tried to recover, smoothing her dress, a brittle smile plastered on her face. How wonderful of you, George," she managed, but her voice shook a little. Linda kept going, never letting go of my hand. "You know, you can learn a lot about people by the way they treat strangers in need. George here? He's got more character in his little finger than most people have in their whole lives." Somewhere near the head of the table, I saw Mary's face light up, pure pride shining in her eyes. Brian was speechless. The other guests, who had spent the last hour judging me, now stared as if seeing me for the first time. Linda looked around the table, her smile cool but unyielding. "I hope you all appreciate what you've got here. There aren't many like him left." I couldn't help it. I felt taller than I had in years. Janet tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, but the mood had shifted. People started asking me questions about the car, about my old garage, about anything at all. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel like an outsider. But the best moment came as the cake was served. Linda leaned in and whispered, "George, you ever need anything, you call me. That's a promise." I just nodded, feeling more grateful than I could put into words. In the space of one evening, the tables had turned. Suddenly, it wasn't about what I wore or what I drove, but about who I was. And as I looked at Mary, her eyes shining with pride, I knew that, finally, I belonged right where I was. After Linda's dramatic entrance, the rest of the party felt like it had flipped upside down. Conversations grew awkward. People who had ignored me earlier now looked for ways to chat. Even Brian, after fumbling with his phone, tried to join in with a thin, nervous smile. The meal continued, but something essential had changed. Janet was unusually quiet, her usual control slipping. She stole glances at Linda, realizing too late how quickly reputations can shift. The other guests, sensing the undercurrent, started asking about my life, where I was from, how long I'd lived in town, what it was like working as a mechanic for 40 years. For the first time, their questions felt genuine. One man, a tall fellow named Tom, leaned over. "So, George, did you really fix her car right there on the highway?" I smiled. "Sure did. Sometimes, when someone's in trouble, you just help. That's what my father taught me." Tom grinned and nodded. "Wish my son-in-law could change a tire, let alone fix a Mercedes." For a moment, laughter bubbled around the table. Even Mary relaxed, her hand resting lightly on my arm. She didn't have to say anything. I could see in her eyes that she was proud of me, maybe for the first time in a long while. But not everyone was ready to forgive and forget. Janet cleared her throat, eager to reclaim control. "We were just discussing how important it is to maintain standards at our events," she said, addressing Linda, her voice brittle. Linda set down her fork. "Yes, standards are important. But I think sometimes people forget that kindness and decency are the highest standards there are." Her words hung in the air, unmistakable in their meaning. Janet's lips pressed together. Brian avoided her gaze, focusing instead on his water glass. I felt the old tension return, but it didn't sting as much anymore. I'd been measured and judged, but for once I had an ally, someone whose opinion truly carried weight. Dessert was served, expensive pastries artfully arranged. The kind of food I never cared much for. But as people ate, the real business of the evening came to light. Palmer, Janet's husband and the family patriarch, began talking about business investments and projects, clearly trying to impress Linda. I sat back, watching it unfold. Palmer talked about expansion, market share, and returns. The words bounced off me. I'd spent a lifetime around men like him. All confidence until the winds changed. Linda listened politely, but she didn't seem all that interested. I realized then, her opinion of this family had already been formed, not by their business plans or social standing, but by how they treated a man who simply tried to help. After dinner, as people lingered over coffee, Linda quietly stood up and made her way over to me. "George, do you have a ride home tonight?" she asked. I shook my head. "My car's out front, but thanks." She smiled. "Well, just in case you ever need anything, here's my personal number. And George, don't ever let anyone tell you you're less than they are. Not even for a second." With that, she made her way out, pausing only to shake hands with Mary and shoot Janet a knowing, slightly amused look. The night wasn't over, but already, it felt like a small victory, for me, for Mary, and for the idea that kindness still counted for something in this world. After Linda left, the energy in the room never quite recovered. The conversation at the table became stilted. Even the birthday cake, which earlier would have been the centerpiece, sat mostly untouched. Janet poked at her slice with her fork, her gaze far away. Palmer's voice had lost its earlier confidence. Now he talked quietly with a business partner, sneaking glances at the door, as if hoping Linda would come back. Mary stayed close to me, her small gestures of care and gratitude more comforting than anything else that evening. I squeezed her hand under the table. "You okay, kiddo?" I whispered. She nodded. "I just wish it hadn't gone like this. I wanted them to see the dad I know." "They did," I said softly. "More than you think." On the far side of the room, Brian and Janet spoke in low, urgent voices. Every so often, Janet glanced at me, her eyes narrowing, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. It struck me how quickly things can shift, how the right words, at the right time, can undo years of silent judgment. Finally, the guests began to drift out, making polite goodbyes. A few shook my hand. Tom, the man who joked about his son-in-law, clapped me on the back. Don't let them give you a hard time, George. You did the right thing. Mary lingered at the door with me as people left. I'm glad you came, Dad. Even if. I stopped her with a gentle look. Sometimes you have to show up. That's half of life. Brian approached, hands stuffed in his pockets. For the first time all night, he looked uncertain. Mary, I'll get the car. George, thanks for helping out on the highway. His words surprised me. They were awkward, but they were honest. Maybe tonight had changed something for him, too. Janet stayed near the window, arms crossed, watching the taillights disappear down the long drive. She didn't say goodbye. As Mary and I walked toward my old Toyota, I glanced back at the grand house, its lights glowing against the night. I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. I'd come here expecting to endure another evening of silent dismissal. Instead, I'd found unexpected respect, not just from a stranger on the highway, but from my own daughter, and maybe even from my son-in-law. I started the engine. Mary hugged me tightly. Promise you'll come again? I smiled. You couldn't keep me away. As I drove home, I thought about Linda, about Susan, about all the twists of fate that had brought me to this moment. The night air felt lighter somehow. For the first time in a long while, I looked forward to tomorrow. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains as I made coffee in my quiet kitchen. I replayed the events of last night, wondering if it had all really happened. My phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. A message from Mary. Thank you for coming, Dad. You made me proud. Her words meant more to me than all the polite handshakes from the night before. I poured myself a cup, sat down at the table, and let myself feel a little bit of hope. Maybe I hadn't changed the world, but I'd changed something for my daughter. And for myself. A second message arrived, this one from a number I didn't recognize. George, it's Linda Whitman. Just wanted to thank you again. You reminded me there are still good people out there. Let's have coffee sometime, my treat. I smiled, feeling a warmth that went deeper than the hot coffee in my hand. Funny how a single act of kindness could echo like that, reaching places I'd never expected. After breakfast, I drove into town to pick up a few groceries. At the store, I ran into Tom, the tall man from the dinner. George! He called, waving me over. You made quite an impression last night. We talked for a few minutes about the party, the awkward moments, and how quickly opinions can change. My wife couldn't stop talking about how you helped that woman, Tom said. Said it was the first real thing she'd seen at one of Janet's parties in years. I left the store with a lighter step, groceries in hand, and the feeling that, for once, the town didn't see me as just the old mechanic, but as something more. Back home, I tinkered with the Toyota in the driveway, my hands busy while my mind wandered. I thought about Susan, how she always said, "The world's a small place, George. Be kind, you never know whose story you'll walk into." The words rang truer than ever now. That afternoon, Linda called. Her voice was bright and warm. George, let's set that coffee date. You free this week? I laughed. I think I can make time. I owe you a story or two about the old days in this town. We made plans, and I hung up, surprised at how much I was looking forward to it. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. One small act, pulling over to help a stranger, had started something bigger than I ever expected. The walls of my little house felt less lonely, and the future felt just a bit brighter. The next week passed in a way that felt new and hopeful. Mary called me more than usual, just to check in or share little updates about the kids. Even Brian texted once, a clumsy, "Hope you're well, George," but it was more than I expected. The coffee with Linda turned out to be more than just a cup of coffee. We met at a cozy diner on Main Street, a place where the waitress knew everyone's name. Linda greeted me with the same warmth she'd shown at the country club, but this time, without any pretense or audience. We talked for hours, about old cars, about her late husband and my Susan, about all the ways life can surprise you when you least expect it. She told me she'd grown up with very little, worked her way up the hard way. I spent so much time trying to fit in with people who only cared about appearances, she said, stirring her coffee. Funny how a broken car reminded me what matters most. When she smiled at me, I saw not just gratitude, but genuine friendship. The kind that makes the world feel less lonely. Back at home, I got a call from Mary one evening. She sounded lighter than she had in years. Dad, you won't believe it. Janet actually asked me about you. She said you handled yourself well under pressure. I think you shook up their world a little. I chuckled. Sometimes, all it takes is a flat tire and a little kindness. Mary hesitated, then spoke softly. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you didn't belong, Dad. You mean the world to me. To all of us. Her words hit me hard in the best way. You never have to apologize for loving your family, Mary. That's all I ever wanted for you. The days rolled on. I saw Linda a few more times for coffee or a walk in the park. Each time, we shared more stories, finding a sense of belonging neither of us had expected at this stage in life. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench under the big old oak tree near the courthouse, Linda turned to me and said, You know, George, I think meeting you was the best thing that's happened to me in years. I smiled, feeling Susan's presence beside me, her voice echoing softly. See, George? The world still needs good people. It wasn't wealth, or fancy dinners, or perfect clothes that made a life matter. It was the kindness we gave and the people we loved. And for the first time in a long time, I was glad to be exactly where I was. The weeks after that dinner party felt different, lighter, like a door had opened somewhere in my life. Mary started inviting me over for family dinners more often, insisting I sit at the head of the table. The grandkids clamored for stories about the adventure Grandpa had at the fancy party. Even Brian, once distant and stiff, thawed a little, sometimes stopping by my house with a coffee just to talk about cars or ask for advice. Word got around town, as it always does in small places. A few of the people from that night reached out, offering thanks or simply wanting to chat. The folks who'd once looked through me now looked me in the eye, greeting me with a respect I hadn't realized I'd missed. Linda and I kept meeting for coffee, sometimes with a walk in the park, sometimes just sitting in the sunlight sharing quiet moments. Friendship deepened into something warmer, an understanding built on trust, laughter, and all the gentle, unspoken things that make life worth living. But more than anything, I noticed how my own heart had changed. I'd spent so many years thinking I was just the old mechanic on the edge of other people's stories. Now I understood, my story had always mattered. The smallest act of kindness, a willingness to help, to show up, to do what was right even when no one was watching, could echo out in ways I'd never imagined. One Sunday, sitting on my porch as the sun set over Maple Avenue, I watched Mary and her family playing in the yard, laughter drifting through the air. Linda pulled up in her Mercedes, waving from the driveway. She joined me on the porch, and we sat in comfortable silence, sipping iced tea. After a while, she said, Funny, isn't it? How helping a stranger can change the course of your whole life. I nodded, feeling the weight and freedom of that truth. I think Susan would have liked you, I said, glancing at Linda with a gentle smile. She squeezed my hand. I hope so. I know I'm glad you stopped on that highway. As twilight settled in, I realized that the world had become a little bit kinder. A little bit closer. Maybe I'd started out as the outsider, but now, I was surrounded by people who truly saw me, and valued me for who I was. And as the evening light faded, I understood something Susan always tried to tell me. Kindness is never wasted. It's the seed that grows into family, friendship, and a life well lived. Whatever tomorrow brought, I'd be ready, with an open heart, a full coffee cup, and a smile for the next stranger who needed a hand.